The room was silent, yet the weight of disbelief hung thick in the air. A group of powerful individuals, business elites, high-ranking officials, and so-called experts, stood frozen in shock. Just moments ago, they had been certain, confident in their judgment. They had laughed, mocked, and dismissed. But now they couldn't believe their eyes. The person they had once deemed insignificant, weak, and worthless stood before them, proving them all wrong in the most impossible way. One of them gasped, his breath caught in his throat. This isn't possible. Another clutched the edge of the table, as if reality itself was slipping away from under him. How could we have been so blind? The once powerful group, who had always looked down upon others from their high pedestals, now found themselves trembling. Their pride had shattered. Their certainty had turned into regret. Because now, standing before them, the one they had rejected, ridiculed, and underestimated was their only hope. And for the first time in their lives, they realized they had judged wrong. The world had once looked at them with disdain, a silent outcast in the crowd. Always in the background, never the center of attention. Society, their peers, and even their own family had labeled them as insignificant. To everyone around them, they were just another face, easily overlooked, easily dismissed. They were considered weak, incapable, and unimportant. Every word they spoke was ignored, every effort they made brushed aside as futile. Their peers laughed at their dreams, mocking them for even daring to think they could make something of themselves. Family members, once loving, had slowly distanced themselves, their eyes now filled with doubt. They didn't understand. How could they? The world had already decided who they were, and no one was willing to look beyond the surface. They were seen as a burden, a weight to be carried, nothing more. Their quiet existence was unnoticed, their true potential buried beneath layers of neglect and shame. But what the world failed to see was the fire burning inside them. It wasn't loud or obvious. It didn't shout from the rooftops or demand attention. It was quiet, steady, like a smoldering ember in the dark. They carried a strength that no one recognized, a resilience that had been forged in the silence of their isolation. What the world couldn't see was that they were never truly defeated. They had been knocked down, yes, but they hadn't stayed down. The judgment they faced only served to harden them, to refine their resolve. Every look of disdain, every dismissal, only added fuel to the fire within. They weren't broken. They were building something that no one could see, something that would rise from the ashes of their past. The moment of judgment had come long ago. It wasn't a single event, but a series of choices, each one reinforcing their belief that this person was nothing. They had ignored them in meetings, dismissed their ideas without a second thought, and smirked whenever they tried to prove their worth. The silent outcast had learned to endure it. "You'll never make it," they had said. "Know your place. Stop trying. It's pathetic." But the one they underestimated never responded with anger, never lashed out, never begged for acceptance. Instead, they observed, listened, learned. And they waited. The world was harsh, but those who survived its cruelty, without losing themselves, were the ones who could reshape it. The outcast knew this truth well. While they were cast aside, they prepared. While they were mocked, they sharpened their mind. While they were pushed down, they built something unseen. Until one day, the moment came. It wasn't a grand announcement. It wasn't a declaration of revenge. It was a quiet step into a test they were never supposed to win. A test designed for failure. The powerful had smirked, confident they would watch this nobody crumble. But for the first time, their smirks faded. Because something was wrong. The one they judged had not failed. They had done the impossible. And the world they thought they controlled would never be the same again. At first, they thought it was a mistake. The test had been designed to be impossible. The rules were set in stone, meant to weed out the weak, to ensure that only those they deemed worthy could succeed. It was tradition, one that had never been broken. Yet here they were, watching the outcast do what no one else had ever done. There was no hesitation. No sign of struggle. Every move was precise, calculated, as if they had known this moment was coming all along. Whispers spread among the observers. Some chuckled nervously, brushing it off as luck. Others frowned, sensing something deeper at play. And then, one of them spoke. "This shouldn't be happening." For the first time, doubt crept into their voices. The outcast was not merely surviving the test, they were excelling, outmaneuvering every challenge, making it look effortless. Each time the group expected them to fall, they rose higher. Each time failure seemed inevitable, they broke through. The impossible was happening before their very eyes. And that's when the first ripple of fear began to form. Because if this person could do what they thought was unthinkable, what else had they been wrong about? One of the elites clenched his jaw, his pride refusing to accept the truth. "No," he muttered under his breath. "They're nothing. They'll fail soon enough." But deep inside, he knew, something had changed. And no one, not even those at the top, could stop it now. Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. They watched, unable to deny it any longer. The outcast, the one they had mocked, dismissed, and ignored, was now standing above them, proving every assumption wrong. The test had been their design, their creation, meant to separate the powerful from the weak. Yet the one they had called weak was now dominating it, making their best look like amateurs. Panic began to set in. "How are they doing this?" someone whispered, their voice laced with disbelief. "They shouldn't even be here," another murmured, gripping the armrest of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. But there was no trick. No loophole. The truth was undeniable now, the one they had discarded had always been capable. More capable than any of them. And they had never noticed. The outcast remained silent, focused, as if they had already accepted what the rest were only now realizing. Every move they made was purposeful, every step pushing them further into a place where no one could challenge them anymore. And then, the final moment came. A challenge designed to break even the strongest. The ultimate barrier that none had surpassed before. The room leaned in, waiting for failure. But failure never came. With calm precision, the outcast did what had never been done before. The moment stretched, the weight of it crashing down on those who once thought themselves superior. Then, a single sound shattered the silence. A slow, deliberate step forward. Not from the outcast. From one of the elites. They stood up, their eyes locked on the one they had underestimated. For the first time, their expression wasn't one of arrogance. It was something far worse. Fear. Because now, they knew, they had made the worst mistake of their lives. The room felt smaller now. The air, heavier. The ones who once held power, who dictated the rules and controlled fates, now sat frozen. Their eyes darted between each other, searching for an explanation, for something that would make sense of what they had just witnessed. But there was nothing. The outcast had not only passed the test, they had obliterated it. Everything they thought they knew, everything they had built their arrogance upon, was crumbling before their very eyes. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Another cleared his throat, as if trying to find the right words to dismiss what had just happened. But the truth was there. Undeniable. Unforgivable. One of them finally spoke, voice low, almost hesitant. We misjudged." It was a small admission, but it carried the weight of something much greater. They had not just misjudged. They had ruined opportunities. They had silenced potential. They had mocked someone who should have stood among them long ago. And now, they were the ones who had fallen behind. The outcast stood there, calm, unreadable. They weren't gloating. They weren't angry. That was the worst part. Because if they had been furious, if they had lashed out, begged for acceptance, or demanded recognition, then maybe, just maybe, the powerful could have told themselves they still held some control. But there was nothing to take back. No apology would change the past. No regret would erase the truth. The ones who had mocked, who had laughed, who had so easily dismissed someone they thought unworthy, now they were the ones left behind, grasping at excuses, trapped by their own ignorance. And for the first time, they felt what it was like to be powerless. The room was still. No one dared to speak. The outcast, the one they had rejected, belittled, and ignored, stood before them, unwavering. It was over. They had lost. Not in the way they expected, not in some grand battle or public humiliation. No, this was worse. Their defeat had come in the form of undeniable truth. They had spent their lives controlling the rules, believing they could decide who was worthy and who wasn't. But now, the very foundation of their world had cracked. One of them swallowed hard, his throat dry. We never meant to. A single look from the outcast silenced him. It wasn't anger in their eyes. It wasn't resentment. It was indifference. They didn't care about the apologies, the excuses, the last-minute attempts to rewrite history. Because the truth was simple, the outcast had never needed them. They had risen without their approval, succeeded without their support, and surpassed them despite their judgment. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. What if they had given this person a chance? What if they had nurtured their potential instead of crushing it? What if they had looked beyond their own arrogance? But regrets were useless now. They had already made their choice. And now, they would have to live with it. The outcast turned, stepping away. There was no need for revenge, no need to prove anything anymore. The silence behind them was proof enough, they had already won. And those who once judged them? They would never forget this moment. The outcast walked away, not in triumph, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had always known the truth. The ones who sat in judgment had built their world on the belief that power belonged only to the chosen few, those born into privilege, those who fit their standards, those who played by their rules. But the outcast had proven them wrong. And now, as the realization fully settled in, fear began to take hold. If they had been wrong about this, what else had they been blind to? What other brilliant minds had they discarded? What other lives had they crushed under the weight of their arrogance? It was a terrifying thought. One of them finally spoke, voice shaking. We need to make this right. But how? The damage was already done. The outcast had risen without them, not because of their support, but in spite of their rejection. Another one of the elites shifted uncomfortably. Maybe if we offer them a position, bring them into our circle, but the words felt empty, even to him. They had spent years pushing this person away. Mocking them. Doubting them. And now, at the very moment they needed them the most, they expected them to simply accept. To forget everything? No. The truth was, they had never held the power. They only thought they did. The outcast had never needed their approval. And now, they didn't need them at all. A deep, sinking feeling settled in the room. This was the price of their judgment. And no matter what they did now, no matter how much they tried to rewrite the past, nothing could change the fact that they had lost something they would never get back. The final moments of regret were now etched into their minds, every word unspoken, every opportunity lost. The weight of their mistake was crushing, and no amount of power or wealth could erase it. The outcast had become something far beyond their reach, a reminder of the price of arrogance. In the days that followed, the ones who had once ruled their world in silence were left to watch from the sidelines as the one they had rejected flourished. Doors that had once been closed opened with ease. People who had once looked down on them now sought out their counsel. And the world began to change, but not in the way they had expected. It was no longer their world. It was the outcast's world now. But even as they watched, the ones who had judged began to realize something deeper. There would be no grand moment of revenge, no dramatic reckoning. The outcast was not interested in proving anything further. They had already won. The one thing the elites could never take back was their failure to recognize true potential when it stood before them. In the silence of their offices, their meetings, and their hollow victories, they sat alone with their regret. What had they learned? What would they do with this new knowledge? Could they change? Could they redeem themselves? The answer was simple, no. They had already made their choice. The judgment had already been passed, and the consequences had already unfolded. Their regret, now a permanent shadow over their every action, was the lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. And as for the outcast? They moved forward, no longer looking behind. The lesson was clear: never underestimate those who seem weak, for strength often lies in places you cannot see. The elites had learned that the hard way. But now, they could never forget.